You run your enterprises by the profit maxim. It disciplines you and stops you from makes you fail when you should fail. And you think, well, I don't want to fail. It's like, it's better than limping along half dead. Starting a successful business enterprise is a profoundly ethical endeavor in the deepest sense, as far as I'm concerned. This is part of what makes me interested in Bitcoin too, because, you know, the cynical view, and many academics share this because they're jealous and they tend to sit on the left, both of those. They like to think of the capitalist enterprise as something that's fundamentally predicated on exploitation. And I think that's wrong on so many levels of analysis simultaneously that it's only possible that someone intelligent and resentful could possibly believe it. Because that isn't what you do when you run a business unless you're a parasite. And if you are, you're not going to last very long. If you're running a valid business in a free market system, you have to offer people who could choose otherwise freely, something they value freely, then you have to deliver it, then it has to work reliably. And all of that's ethical. You promise to pay me, I promise to deliver, I do deliver, the thing I deliver works. If it doesn't work, I solve the problem. And if I don't do that, I'll develop a very bad reputation very, very rapidly, because there's nothing that destroys you quicker than unhappy customers, because word of mouth spreads exponentially. Don't be defensive about the ethics of your capitalistic enterprise. Quite the contrary, you should be on the offensive, claiming, like forthrightly, that what you're doing is profoundly ethical, in that you're providing free people, free customers, the option to make free choices about what they value. It's like, what's wrong with that?
Wow. Cheers to that.
People are easily set back on their heels ethically when confronted by those kinds of accusations. You know, this capitalist system is nothing but a system of exploitation. And what's the proof? Well, look at your profit, and all that profit is the exploitation of others. It's like, no, that's not true. First of all, you can't run your enterprise profitably unless you run it efficiently and intelligently, because there's nothing that slips through the hands of a fool faster than money. And so if you manage to run it profitably, then that's actually an indication of your care and conscientiousness and dutifulness and ethical orientation. And then if you have even 1/10 of a clue, you take that profit and you don't do something narrowly, selfishly, and pointlessly hedonistic with it. You invest it in your enterprise, or in a parallel enterprise, and you try to make more goods and services available to more people. And if people accuse you of nothing but greed in your attempts to do that, then I would say that says a hell of a lot more about the accusers and their worldview than it does about you, because all of that turns out to be really hard. The best way to understand something is to jump into it, in some sense, feet first, you know, because there's no substitute for the real thing, or there's no valid substitute for the real thing. And, you know, I try to stay on the technological edge insofar as at my advanced age, I'm capable of that, which is, you know, decreasingly the case. And the Bitcoin phenomena attracted my attention for a couple of reasons. One was partly because the story of its development is so unbelievable that it sounds like a fairy tale, right? It's so strange, you can't believe it's true, but it seems to be true insofar as anybody can tell, and so that attracted my attention right away. But then the idea of a decentralized monetary system, well, that is a revolutionary idea, and the more I thought about it, and it actually it makes me wary, which is something we could talk about. I mean, one of the lovely things about cash is that it is a decentralized monetary system in large part. It's not that easy to track cash, thank God, because you could be bloody certain that if it was possible to track cash, that every agency with some ethical notion any ethical notion whatsoever would be tracking absolutely everything you ever purchased, trying to nudge and tap and compel you into making the decisions they regarded as ethical. We can't compute the future algorithmically from the past, and so we have to use mechanisms other than deterministic algorithm to plot our way forward. And part of the way we do that is by using the entire economic system as a massive computational device that uses the array of choices that everyone makes as the mechanism that values new things as they emerge. Now, central planning types, they think they can just jump over that and say, well, no, we need to save the planet, let's say. That's the ESG monsters are on beating that drum at the moment. And so they think they can subordinate that computational mechanism to some sort of ethical or procedural algorithm. And I think that's complete bloody nonsense. And worse than that, I think it's extremely dangerous. As soon as you subordinate free market mechanisms to central planning ethical dogmas, you catastrophically affect the economic system in a detrimental manner, but you destabilize the entire society and tilt it towards totalitarianism. And we haven't learned that yet because, there's always a new generation of people that think they're smart enough to plan the world. And Bitcoin, in principle, stops that from happening. I thought I would be motivated to try to understand Bitcoin if I actually invested some money in it, because I do believe the proposition that you don't really make genuine decisions if you're sampling a domain unless you have skin in the game, to use another cliche. And so I was curious on that front. I was curious about the idea of a decentralized ledger of accounts, and then curious also about the notion of competitive currencies, because as someone who regards the free market as an existential necessity, the idea that alternative currencies might be produced that could give the fiat currencies a run for their money, so to speak, that seemed to me to be attractive. And then I was also attracted by the revolutionary element of the idea, which makes it not humble in some sense, which is one of the things that worries me, because it looks to me like if the Bitcoin theorists are correct, and Bitcoin does take priority over the other cryptocurrencies, which we don't know if that's the case, but it could be, that could take the monetary system permanently out of the hands of the political establishment, or the political system. That also worries me, because when you do something complex, you think this is the problem with the central planning mentality. You have this notion about how the world might be a better place, and so you do something complex like change the basis of the currency, and you think, well, here's a whole bunch of good things that'll happen because of that, and you might be right about that, but there's going to be an immense number of things that happen as well that you didn't predict at all, and you have zero idea and zero evidence about whether those things will be positive or negative. And so this experiment that you're all running, I'm running, all the people who are involved in the cryptocurrency world are running, is like, well, okay, we're going to take money out of the hands of politicians, but that also means out of our hands as voting agents, right? Because it's not just politicians, that's you guys too. We have no idea what would happen if money per se was actually decentralized. And we also don't know, like, if we manage that, let's say Bitcoin attains primacy, is it irreversible? I don't think that's a particularly revolutionary observation on my part. That's the sort of thing that especially the real Bitcoin enthusiasts, the ones who are delving into the phenomenon from a philosophical or even a theological perspective, weirdly enough, are insisting, well, it's incorruptible because there is no central agent of control. I mean, I'm just bringing coals to Newcastle here. I mean, one of the things that all of you object to is the ability of central bankers to inflate the currency. And I do think you can make a pretty credible argument that you can interpret that as a form of theft. And I'm not saying it is, because that's complicated, right? I mean, in a free society like your society, and until recently mine. Yeah, I wish that was funny. You know, the people who are managing the monetary supply are elected, and that means that we do have control over the process, or at least as much control as any of us have over any political processes, and we're gonna take that away. Money's a ledger. You know, it's an exchange of labor. It's an exchange of productivity. It's an exchange of value. That's a better way of thinking about it. It's a way of tracking the exchange of value between individuals. And it isn't obvious that once you and I enter into a contract of value, that a third party should be able to alter the means by which we track that exchange for their purposes, whatever those purposes are. And again, I think that's a rational argument, but that doesn't mean it's right. These are very, very complicated issues. I mean, most of us assume that taxation is acceptable, or at least we don't, you know, strike up the revolution because it occurs. We seem to think that there is a role for government and for the determinations that government make outside the free market per se. Obviously, the government has to exercise some control over currency, over money, in order to make its functions possible. If we take the control of currency away from the government, we don't know what that'll do, for example, to taxation. You know, if we could all of a sudden do all of our transactions in secrecy, I guess what I would point to from the devil's advocate perspective is that, well, we shifted away from the gold standard in the 70s, and you know, all hell hasn't broken loose. Now, I do accept the proposition that currencies have inflated, and perhaps in a counterproductive manner, but the last 60 years have been pretty damn productive economically, and so that system did work. Now, you could say, well, it could have worked better. It's like, yeah, maybe, but it certainly could have worked a hell of a lot worse. And so, well, this isn't a criticism of Bitcoin. It's just, I mean, I've watched over the years as social scientists have tried to mount large-scale social experiments with the best of intentions, and you know, generally, almost invariably, that doesn't work. I'm not really suggesting that you do anything as a consequence of this caution. I'm just saying that, you know, unbridled enthusiasm predicated on the assumption that your new system will only do the good things you think it will do, that's not wise. That isn't what'll happen. Now, this currency revolution might be proceeding in as positive a manner as we could expect, because at the moment what we have is, in some sense, unbridled competition between a variety of currencies. I mean, we had that before, because you could hold currency from different countries, and that was analogous in some sense, and so that possibility existed before. But you have the cryptocurrencies now, and they're competing with fiat currencies, and maybe that's the right way to settle which one is more valid, is to let the competition proceed apace and let a multitude of people make their free choice and, you know, accept the emergent winner as the valid winner.
Right.
And since I believe the market is the only way of making those sorts of calculations, then that seems like a fair approach.
It seems fair to me too, yeah.
Yeah, well, I suspect that there'll be a lot of obstacles along the way, because I think Bitcoin is now worth more than silver. I believe that's the case.
I believe that's true, yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that. So that, you know, it's silver has been a standard of value, not as reliably as gold, but maybe second or third place. And so the fact that Bitcoin has knocked it out of that position is really something. Okay, so I'll see if I can make that intelligible in a relatively short period of time. At the end of the biblical narrative in Genesis, you have two types of catastrophe, and one is a flood and the other is a Tower of Babel. And we could start with the Tower of Babel, because I think that's in some sense what the Austrian economists criticize, and also perhaps why the Brits voted to leave the EU. And so the idea would be, and this is kind of a conservative idea, that the best level of governance is the most local level possible, right? And so
I think the Swiss will like to hear that.
What's that?
The Swiss will like to hear that.
Yes. And the reason for that is that as your system develops layers, this certainly happens in business. Imagine that one of the problems you have as a business person is that you have to be aware of your customers and what they want. Obviously, you have to be more aware of that than anything else because you're trying to deliver what they want to them. And so if you're well informed about what they want, then hypothetically you can deliver what they want. Then you can imagine building a enterprise that has so many levels of intermediary processing that by the time you get to the decision makers, none of the signal from the salespeople is left. Well, that's the Tower of Babel, is that the system doesn't even know what problems it should be solving anymore because it's got too internally complex. And you heard that mantra back in 2008 over and over, too big to fail. And when I heard that, I thought, no, you got it exactly backwards. It's so big, it will inevitably fail. The advantage to not being centralized is that no one has to make those death decisions, right? They just happen. And that sucks if you happen to be one of the people who's dying. But the problem is, and you might think, well, wouldn't it be great if no enterprise failed? And the answer to that is, well, no, actually, it wouldn't be great because you don't get success without failure. Two other justifications for capitalism and for free markets. The first is that it gives warlike people something to do that isn't destructive. Right? And okay, that's worth thinking about because that desire to expand, that desire to build empire, let's say, that's not all pathological. And capitalism does allow people to generate their own kingdom, right? And hopefully one that other people want to partake in. And so that's a really big deal, that's a mechanism that enables us to productively harness the aggressive and assertive element of the human personality. That's to be able to transmute that into something positive. That's an unbelievably useful enterprise, and capitalism doesn't get any credit for that, and that's sad. And then the other thing is that I run every single project I am involved in on a for-profit basis. And the reason for that isn't so much that I want the profit, although I'm not averse to that, and maybe I can do some additional interesting things with the money. But one of the things that I have learned is that it's really good discipline. If you can't make your idea attractive enough to other people so that they're willing to give you money for it, it's possible that it's a stupid idea or that you're doing it badly. And you actually need to know that because it's back to the zombie problem.
Right.
You think, well, we shouldn't subsidize zombies. It's fair enough. Do you want to be one? You run your enterprises by the profit maxim. It disciplines you and stops you from makes you fail when you should fail. And you think, well, I don't want to fail. It's like, it's better than limping along half dead.